A soft dawn mist rises from the Nile. Reeds sway gently along the riverbank. An Egyptian princess steps down into the cool water for her morning bath, while her attendants stand watch at a respectful distance. She is powerful, yet in this moment, she is simply a daughter seeking a quiet ritual. Then something unusual catches her eye. A small woven basket, carefully sealed with pitch, floats among the reeds. She sends her slave girl to fetch it. When she opens the lid, a Hebrew baby looks up at her and cries. You can almost feel the tension in that single second. Pharaoh, her own father, had ordered every Hebrew boy thrown into the river. Yet here, right in front of her, is a living child. And something stirs inside her. The Hebrew word for what she feels is rakum, a deep, wound-like compassion that rises unbidden. She decides, in that instant, to defy the most powerful man in the world. This is not a story about famous queens or named heroines. This is not a story about women the Bible spotlights with long genealogies. This is not a story about power or position. This is a story about the unnamed women God used to shift the entire direction of redemption history. Stay with me, because one compassionate decision beside a river would echo for centuries. And we will come back to that princess and her quiet act of courage. But not yet. You see, the Bible is filled with women whose names we never learn, yet whose obedience changed everything. They were midwives, slave girls, widows, outcasts. They had no titles, no platforms, no armies. Yet God moved through their hidden faithfulness in ways that still shape our world today. Here's what most people miss. While we remember Moses, David, and Paul, we often walk right past the women whose courage made their stories possible. Today we are going to meet several of them. And by the end, you may look at your own ordinary, unseen life with brand new eyes. Now picture this. Two Hebrew midwives stand before the most powerful ruler on earth. Pharaoh's face is hard as stone. He has just given a direct order. Every boy born to the Hebrews must be killed at birth. The midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, look at each other. Their hands that have helped bring life into the world are now being asked to end it. They could have obeyed. Most people would have. But they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. So they let the boys live. When Pharaoh demanded an explanation, they told him the Hebrew women were too strong and gave birth before the midwives could arrive. A clever answer. A dangerous one. You can feel the tension in that royal court. One wrong word, and these two women would have been executed on the spot. Yet they chose obedience to God over safety. And because of them, an entire generation of Hebrew boys survived, including one very special baby we have already met by the river. Here's what most people miss. God did not wait for a mighty warrior or an eloquent spokesman. He used two ordinary midwives whose names most of us only remember because they refused to kill. Their quiet defiance bought time for the deliverer of Israel to be born. But the danger only grew. A mother named Jochebed looked at her 3-month-old son and knew she could no longer hide him in their small slave house. Every cry put the whole family at risk. So she did the hardest thing any mother could do. She took a basket, sealed it with pitch and tar, placed her baby inside, and set him among the reeds of the Nile. You can imagine her heart breaking as she walked away from that riverbank. Tears streaming, arms empty. She had no guarantee she would ever see him again. This was grief wrapped in desperate faith. She was letting go of her child into the very river that was supposed to be his grave. And then the princess appeared. The same princess we met at the beginning. She opened the basket. She heard the cry, and that deep Rakim compassion rose up again. Instead of calling the guards, she claimed the child as her own. She even hired a Hebrew nurse, not knowing it was his own mother, Jochebed, who would now feed and care for her son right under Pharaoh's nose. Pay attention to this. One woman's compassion met another woman's sacrifice. An Egyptian princess and a Hebrew slave mother, from completely different worlds, became partners in God's plan without ever speaking to each other. Moses was saved, raised in the palace, prepared to deliver his people, all because two unnamed or barely named women said yes, when everything in them must have screamed no. But the pattern keeps going. Fast forward several centuries to the land of Aram. A little Israelite girl has been taken captive in a raid. She is young, far from home, and now a servant in the house of Naaman, the powerful commander of the Aramean army. Naaman has leprosy. He is desperate. His wealth and rank cannot save him. One day the girl speaks to Naaman's wife. Simple words from a child. If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy. That's all. No long sermon. No dramatic prophecy. Just honest hope spoken by a slave girl who had every reason to stay silent and bitter. Yet Naaman listens. He travels to Israel. He meets Elisha. He is healed. And not just healed in body. He returns home declaring faith in the God of Israel. All because one unnamed Israelite girl, taken from her family, chose to speak kindness instead of resentment. But it gets even more remarkable. Centuries later, in the little coastal town of Zarephath, a widow is scraping together her last meal. She has a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug, just enough for one final loaf for herself and her son before they lie down and wait for death. Famine has taken everything else. Then the prophet Elijah appears at her gate and asks for water and bread. You can picture her standing there, exhausted, measuring her last resources in the palm of her hand. Most of us would have said no. But this unnamed widow chooses to give first. She bakes that small cake and hands it to the stranger. And in that moment of radical obedience, everything changes. The jar of flour did not go empty, and the jug of oil did not run dry. Day after day, week after week, there was always enough. Pay attention to this. Her simple act of faith fed not only her own family, but sustained the prophet who would confront kings and call down fire from heaven. One widow's kitchen became a daily miracle factory. Now watch what happens next. The stakes climb higher still when we step into the dusty roads of Galilee. A woman has been bleeding for 12 long years. She has spent everything she owns on doctors who only made her worse. Under Jewish law, she is ceremonially unclean. She lives as a ghost in her own community, isolated, ashamed, and getting weaker every single day. But she hears about Jesus. Something rises up inside her. She pushes through the crowd, comes up behind him, and reaches out with trembling fingers to touch the edge of his cloak. Immediately, the bleeding stops. She feels it in her body. Healing has come. Jesus turns around in the middle of the pressing crowd and asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples are confused. "Everyone is touching you," they say. But Jesus knows. He is looking for her. When she steps forward, trembling, and tells him the whole truth, he speaks words she will never forget. "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Here's what most people miss. She did not wait for an invitation. She did not wait until she felt worthy. She pressed through shame, through pain, through 12 years of disappointment, and reached out in faith. And Jesus honored that faith publicly. The woman the world had pushed to the edges was called daughter by the Son of God himself. Stay with me. These women keep showing us the same beautiful pattern. And now we come to the moment that pulls every thread together. Picture the heat of noon in Samaria. The sun beats down on the dusty ground. Most women come to the well in the cool of early morning or late evening. But one woman arrives at the hottest hour of the day, alone. She has been married 5 times and is now living with a 6th man. In her culture, she is an outcast among outcasts. She carries her water jar with shoulders heavy from shame. Then Jesus sits down at the well, tired from travel, thirsty. He looks at her and asks for a drink. You can imagine her surprise. A Jewish man speaking to a Samaritan woman? Unheard of. But he keeps talking. He offers her living water that will never leave her thirsty again. He gently reveals that he knows every detail of her broken story. 5 husbands. The man she is with now. Everything. Instead of running away in shame, something breaks open inside her. She sees the Messiah standing right in front of her. And in that moment she leaves her water jar behind, runs back to her town, and tells everyone, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? You need to feel the weight of this." An unnamed Samaritan woman with a wrecked reputation becomes the first person in her entire region to proclaim the good news. Because of her words, the whole town comes streaming out to meet Jesus. Many believe, not because of a sermon from a trained rabbi, but because one broken, unnamed woman dared to speak what she had seen and heard. Here's what most people miss. This is the same pattern we saw beside the Nile all those centuries earlier. Remember that Egyptian princess? She reached into the river, took a crying Hebrew baby into her arms, and changed the course of a nation. One quiet act of compassion preserved the deliverer of Israel. Now, at a well in Samaria, another unnamed woman reaches out, receives the living water from the ultimate deliverer, and runs to bring an entire city to him. The circle closes, from the river that was meant for death to the well that becomes a fountain of life. God has been writing the same story through the lives of unnamed women all along. Think about a mother sitting in the dark hours of the night, rocking a feverish child in her arms. No one sees her. No cameras roll. No applause comes. She whispers prayers over that small body, tears mixing with the sweat on her forehead. She has nothing left to give except her presence and her trust. In that hidden place, she is living the exact same story these biblical women lived. You may feel like that mother right now, or like the woman at the well, or the widow measuring her last flour, or the slave girl far from home. You may feel unnamed, overlooked, carrying wounds no one else fully understands. But Jesus still sits at the well of your life. He still knows everything you ever did, and he still offers living water that can heal what nothing else can touch. This is the climax of the pattern. The God who used midwives, mothers, slave girls, widows, and outcasts is the same God who sees you today. He does not need your name to be famous. He only needs your yes. So what does all of this mean for you and me today? First, God does his greatest work through people the world never bothers to name. The midwives, the slave girl, the widows, the outcast at the well, none of them had titles or spotlight moments. Yet their obedience literally altered the flow of salvation history. If God can use them, he can use anyone who simply says yes. Second, your quiet obedience in hidden places has ripple effects you may never see in this lifetime. That Egyptian princess had no idea her compassion would lead to the Exodus. The little slave girl never imagined her words would bring a commander to faith. The Samaritan woman could not have dreamed her testimony would bring a whole town to Jesus. Your small acts of faithfulness, the midnight prayers, the kindness no one notices, the courage to speak when it would be easier to stay silent. Those are the very things God multiplies into eternity. And third, the same Jesus who met a broken Samaritan woman at a well is still seeking you right now, exactly as you are. He knows every chapter of your story, every failure, every wound, every hidden shame, and he still offers living water. He still calls you daughter or son. He still invites you to leave your water jar behind and run tell others what he has done for you. Which one of these unnamed women's stories hit you the hardest today, and why? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Maybe it was the mother releasing her baby into the river. Maybe the widow giving her last meal. Or maybe the woman who pressed through the crowd with nothing but desperate faith. Tell me below. You may feel unseen right now. The world may not know your name. But in the story God is writing, the unnamed are never unimportant. In fact, they are often the very ones he uses to change everything. Thank you for watching. If this stirred your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that their hidden faithfulness matters. And I will see you in the next video.